Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and apparently today we're getting a massive update dropping for the pre-patch, patch 12.01, which is a massive set of updates which brings with it a bunch of new changes, a lot of those being changes from the beta that are now making their way into the live realms, which includes massive overhauls to the UI, everything from boss timers to boss meters to damage meters to nameplates, even transmogging. A bunch of these systems that they've updated for Midnight are receiving a pretty big overhaul in this update. But also there's a lot of class buffs here, some of which we actually did cover in another video, and I don't really think it's a good idea for me to spend the time repeating myself all over again with all these other buffs. So later in the video I'll talk about how I'm handling that, but essentially I'm just going to be doing a condensed version for some of the changes that are covered in a separate video, and anything new that I'm actually going to dive into in detail for this one specifically. Because it's a long, big update, I'm going to have timestamps down below so you can skip around to all the relevant sections that you were the most interested in, or if you want to reference them back in the future. With that being said, if you do want to see more regular updates for patch notes and anything regarding Midnight in general as an expansion, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. Before we dive into the class changes, we are receiving a good number of UI updates for pre-patch. A lot of these UI updates have been around on beta, but they're now finally starting to make it into the pre-patch realm in preparation for Midnight launch. So this is going to be a pretty big overhaul, and there's a bunch of things that have been adjusted. Like the transmog system, artifacts can now again override currently equipped weapons. You'll get better window management when it comes to naming conventions and customizing different outfits, but also some cost reductions for certain events such as Trial of Style, as well as Venthyr Emperor Court. Nameplates have also gone a couple of adjustments here as well ever since their initial release to try further refine them a little bit better. Better cast highlights whenever an enemy is casting at you. That's going to be made more obvious for your characters. More controls show just the scaling of the nameplates, but also fix issues with raid markers in certain crowd controls not being displayed properly. Damage meters have also gone through a few changes as well, specifically enemy damage category and death recap being added, which is going to give you a lot more information as to if you do die in a dungeon or raid, exactly what killed you, exactly what was avoidable damage or what wasn't avoidable, so you get better information there. But also session data, so like every time you log in or log out, no longer just resets on the log out for a character, so you can actually keep those sessions even if you log out of a character if you want to reference them later. Boss warnings have also been adjusted in a great way. I actually didn't know this myself, but they have the timeline version. But if you enjoyed like the bar version of DBM or Bigwigs, they do have a bar version of boss timers as well. So if you want to place them off to the side instead of having the top of your screen be crowded, you now can do so pretty easily, and it even gives you timers for all those abilities. It's so nice, and I kind of like how smooth it all looks in general. So it's a pretty big addition, pretty awesome, and is going to help fill the bottom left of my screen, which I usually have my bars there, but now it's just kind of nice. I just actually prefer that over the timeline in general, so that's a pretty big change as well. Otherwise, we also do get a number of different things, such as raid frames will have a few more customizations, specifically when it comes to healer customizing, cooldown manager, editing, and aura alerts are now in as part of the pre-patch update. And also, text-to-speech has also been improved. While not a lot of players utilize text-to-speech for their day-to-day gameplay, some players for raiding and Mythic Plus content have actually started to use that feature because it will give you alerts and announcements like when an enemy is casting a spell directly at your character. So like if you do Mythic Plus dungeons and you just want to be alerted, usually you would do this with add-ons, that an enemy is casting a spell at you, giving you an opportunity to maybe stun them, interrupt them, or even pop a defensive cooldown, there's now an opportunity for you to add text-to-speech within pre-patch in order to give you more of that granular additional alerts. Most players will use it as an accessibility feature, but Mythic Plus players have also been started to use it recently in beta as like an alert feature for some of those mechanics in particular. As for the class changes, I am going to go over them in an alphabetical order, but I am not really going to be detailed for every single change. Recently, we did post a video on some of the changes on the beta, where I did go into much greater detail regarding a lot of these. This is essentially some of those beta changes plus additional info. So for stuff that we've already covered previously, I will mention that, hey, there's a separate video in the description. If you do want to get more detailed info, go to that video. Here, I will summarize some of those beta changes, but also I will add new changes on top of it, starting with the class of Death Knight, where for Blood and Frost, I'm just going to do a summarization. For Blood, we saw huge damage improvements for Blood DK, pretty much for majority of your abilities, plus a slight survivability increase, definitely give a blood a go this time around. It's looking like it actually is going to hit much harder, specifically in dungeon content. Frost Deathness tuning was mostly kind of wishy-washy, you know, some buffs to obliterate, some nerfs to Frost Sight, as well as Frost Sight related talents, but nothing crazy. For them, what is going to matter though is some of the changes to Rider versus Deathbringer. Rider got a pretty heavy nerf for both Unholy and Frost, and for Frost, it looks like they're going to be peeling away from it, or at least not completely going all in onto Rider. Deathbringer got a sizable increase for Frost in particular, so it's an attempt for them to try to make Deathbringer and Rider a little bit more even, but there's a good chance that you're probably going to be bringing back Deathbringer Frost going forward for the pre-patch. And while Blood and Frost section was really quick, Unholy is not that quick whatsoever. They actually have gotten a number of changes over the time for pre-patch. So there's going to be a huge swaths of adjustments here, like basic damage increases and nerfs on top of it. Unholy found itself to be kind of popular in the beta, and it's probably something. It's just unfortunate to see that Blizzard noticed it that early, because nerfs are coming. As soon as the spec gets too strong and too popular in the beta, nerfs appear afterwards. First of all, Unholy saw auto attack and ability damage reduction by 35%. Scourge Strike as an ability also got nerfed by 28%. Some of the diseases, however, like Virulent Plague, for instance, that got buffed up a little bit, but Dread Plague saw a 15% damage nerf. Epidemic, however, the AoE version of Death Coil, did receive a slight 15% damage buff. Pretty much everything on Unholy window as well, all the pets and all the variety of different abilities got nerfed as well. The only one that didn't get nerfed is Summon Gargoyle. The Gargoyle that you summon specifically didn't get touched, but every other undead of your toolkit, whether it's your base pet, summons, the Raise A-Bomb, everything got nerfed all across the board in a fairly massive way. Unholy Death Knights also get new access to a talent called Scythe of Decay, which replaces Death of Decay, where Festering Scythe will now cast the Death of Decay automatically. Normally, this passive proc is a 15-second or 30-second CD, but if you're playing Death's Echo, that is going to reduce down to 15 seconds, so it should give Unholy some potential for Death and Decay based play in the future. The talent of Super Strain has been redesigned, where Dread Plague will now hit a secondary target for 75% damage, but also has a slight chance to gain Runic Power to give you a little bit more Plague cleaving, because you have two Plagues. You have the Virulent, which just hits everybody around you, and then Dread Plague, which has a single target amplified damage component. So now you can hit two targets with it, or rather cleave a secondary target for a portion of its value. Then we got a bunch of talent changes, like Reanimation has been updated, where Putrefy will summon a Mages of the Dead for 15 seconds, which is going to increase the value from, what, 8-second duration to a 15, which is pretty nice. The talent of Pestilence had been updated, where now it's going to consume whenever Dark Transformation, whenever you press Dark Transformation, it just upgrades you Outbreak into Pestilence. It used to be an ability you had to press it and then it would be upgraded. Now it's just a lot more like instantly upgraded, so you could preset it up ahead of time. But they did reduce the power of this. Instead of doing the talent of Pestilence have also been updated. Previously, after Dark Transformation, you needed to first apply diseases and then you would transform into Pestilence. Now it just automatically transforms Outbreak into Pestilence. And with Pestilence, they actually buffed up the damage, consuming 100% of the plague damage instantly, but deals 150% of the remaining damage instead of 100%. So a nice buff for this capstone. Like I said before, Army of the Dead as well as other undeads will also get nerfed quite a decent bit. Army of the Dead will summon ghouls that are now 75% more effective than basic ghouls instead of 100%. They will last for 15 seconds baseline at the very least though. Abilities like Raise Abomination or Gargoyle no longer automatically putrefy two of your ghouls, and the Raise A-Bomb's Disease Cloud that buffs your minion damage have also been reduced quite a bit. The ability of Soul Rape has now been also adjusted greatly. It now increases putrefied damage whenever you do use it as an execute. It also consumes all available putrefied charges to cast Putrefy on the target to kind of help out with some of that rotational bloat. And finally, Blightfall will increase all disease damage by 5% instead of 10%, so it's another nerf there as well. Moving on to Devour Demon Hunter, and for Demon Hunters there really isn't anything new from the beta. It's primarily going to be buffs for Devour, which are also kind of already been partially in pre-patch, basically buffing the ability of Reap and giving a more consistent resource generation. So the biggest advantage that Devourers will actually get a benefit from in pre-patch is the ability of Collapsing Star, which is meant to be a core ability that Demon Hunters should spec into. That being said, there are some builds that don't even utilize this ability whatsoever. And so, because it's a good ability in AoE, but not really great in single target, but they still want it to be a very core ability because so many of your skills actually rely or play around with the ability of Collapsing Star to one degree or another. So what they're doing is whenever you get Collapsing Star, like after you can gather all of your soul fragments, if you start channeling the ability and then you move last second in order to avoid mechanics, you still lost all of those soul fragments to even use the ability. Now, whenever this happens, whenever you do have to move, it will no longer consume those soul fragments. It'll instead just put a cooldown on the ability for a short second, but it won't make you waste those soul fragments whatsoever, which is super, super nice, making the playstyle so much better. And main mechanic for Devour Demon Hunter is now finally playable. It's been playable in beta, but now it's going to be made playable on pre-patch. The class of Druid also got a couple of changes as well, and it looks like it's for most of the specs. Restoration, for example, is going to be made to be a little bit less OP, because it has been really, really strong in the beta for Mythic Plus dungeons specifically, which is not too many nerfs regardless. It's primarily like some crit, regrowth, scaling that they're toning back a bit, but they are making them better for raid content in particular. Guardian Druid got a ton of big damage buffs all across the board, which is super, super nice. A variety of different talents and offensive abilities got improved. Balanced Druid also saw a bunch of buffs that we covered over on the beta video. But this time around though, it looks like they did remember that, wait, Feral is a spec of Druid, so they did get some buffs. And by I mean some, it's really like a handful. First of all damage has been increased by 8%, which is alright. I guess that's a bit of an improvement. They also increased the damage of Swipe, but 20% while in cat form, so that is going to improve their AoE. They also did buff up the healing of Rejuve and Wild Growth as like hybrid healing options, which is, I guess, okay, but that's really about all Ferals have gotten. A lot of players were hoping for a lot more than that, but it's at least a step in possibly a right direction. It doesn't quite change some of the core issues of the Feral, but it's at least an improvement regardless. Then we have the class of the Evoker, and for them, there wasn't really too many new things from the beta. As Devastation, they did end up toning down some of that Flame Shaper, Fire Breath, Funnel damage, which was super, super strong, so they are redistributing the damage for that a little bit. As Scale Commander, they just want to make sure you're not having to use the ability of Deep Breath too often, so you're just constantly flying around a raid or a dungeon, because that's a nice position that can be really, really difficult to do. So they increase the base power without making you use Deep Breath nearly as aggressively as you were using. Then we get some adjustments for augmentation. One of them is apparently players were canceling Ebon Might. You can now no longer cancel Ebon Might, which is just hilarious to me. I do remember when augmentation first launched to the scene, players were protesting them and made macros where they would automatically cancel Ebon Might to help tank augmentation's logs and raids, which was absolutely hysterical. So I don't know why they made this change. Maybe there was some tech that players were doing with Ebon Might canceling, but you can no longer cancel it, and Ebon Might extension duration now matches the actual application rate, so you can just extend it on somebody, move miles away, and then keep the buff rolling forever and ever and ever. They also, because there's now less like add-ons that you can use in order to figure out who has a buff, who doesn't have a buff, who do you like buff up in general, they wanted to improve the ability to sense power. For this one specifically, they made it so now it dynamically updates duration of any major cooldown, so like if there's an extension, it will be accounting for it. Also, a lot more abilities are now whitelisted into the ability effect, so we can give you a hopefully better idea of who has cooldowns rolling in, who you should be buffing for damage in like a raid or a dungeon scenario specifically. Mostly regarding the ability of Prescience, which is your only like targeted buff that you can now really do for any of your allies, because Ebon Might just buffs everybody, like in a raid, literally the entire raid is getting buffed up. So this should hopefully give you a little bit better optimization tools and in-game support for buff gameplay. Moving on to the class of Hunter, and this one you'll actually have to reference the original beta video if you want to get real big nitty-gritty details on it, because nothing really new is here for pre-patch specifically. Beastmaster Hunter got nerfed crazily. They were basically found to be performing above most classes on beta, so baseline power reductions are pretty heavy for them in particular, which is unfortunate. Survival does receive some buffs, primarily for Wildfire Bomb single target damage, while balancing out some of the differences between the power of Sentinel and Pack Leader. Marksmanship Hunter kinda got buffs, mostly towards some of their cleave-based talents, volley, kill shot, talents that they weren't always utilizing, but also Dark Ranger buffs as well, so potentially we could see a Dark Ranger Marksmanship return at some point in the future. Then we have the class of Mage, and for them, again, I will ask you to reference the video that we did on beta where we covered their changes specifically in more detail. But if you want to get a quick synopsis, for Arcade specifically, they wanted to equalize the power between Sunfury and Spellslinger, so pretty big damage shifts have been done for Arcane, but it does make Spellslinger a really strong and potentially a really good option for Mythic Plus dungeons. So if you ever want to play an Orb Arcade Mage, now will be your time. For fire, they essentially adjusted the ability of Pyroblast so it isn't useless in executes, because they noticed that fire mages were literally starting to cast Fireball, or rather Frost Firebolt, in execute and nothing else, just ignoring Pyroblast. So they've adjusted it so you actually will need to use the ability quite regularly. For Frost Mages, what they're doing is putting more emphasis on abilities like Ice Lance, and specifically their Shatter Freeze mechanic, but also toning down some of the other abilities like Frostbolt and Flurry to put less emphasis on those specifically. They combined also all these changes together with some nerfs for AoE abilities like Frozen Orb, as well as the Common Storm Shatter Consumption mechanic. So it is slight reductions for Frost, but mostly just a shift to make sure that the Shatter as well as Lances are supported as a core mechanic going forward, and not something that you will be ignoring down the line. From there, we have the class of Monk, and we got some quick synopsis, but also some new updates here as well. For Brewmaster particularly, we actually saw huge buffs across the board, which I think a lot of players are going to benefit from with the pre-patch update. Mistweaver, they actually did do some more granular changes, like ability of Shaylun's Gift. It now has a bit more of an upfront, better base healing, but its mist healing scaling factor has been removed or reduced slightly. Mana Tea is now made to be more effective when it comes to restoring mana, and abilities like Thunder Focus Tea is a 30-second cooldown instead of 45-second cooldown, since so many abilities are tied to their use of Thunder Focus Tea. So this is actually quite a decent buff for Mistweaver overall. Jadefire teachings, as well as this melee healing or damage to healing conversion mechanics, have all got buffed up. Jadefire is now more effective, but also abilities such as Wave the Crane are also a little bit more effective at that as well. Aside of that, Windwalker got buffed up quite a decent bit, pretty much all across the board. A number of abilities got improved, mostly to make sure that they have more AoE, but also specific abilities with specific roles, like certain abilities will be used in pure AoE content, while others will be used in pure single target content. They want to make sure that those abilities that are purely used for one or the other are a lot more effective in that content specifically. Like, for example, Rising Sun Kick, damage increased by 20%, while Spinning Crane Kick buffed up by 50%. So you're basically reinforcing both elements of Windwalker specifically. Other effects such as Jadefire Stump have also got buffed up by 25%, while Flurry of Zuen got buffed up by 40%. Fist of Fury did receive a 10% damage nerf overall, but it's mostly to make sure that it doesn't over or supersede Rising Sun Kick as a priority in pure single target content. Sounds like Sunfire Spiral are now going to be increase your mastery, effectiveness of your mastery for combo strikes by 40 additional percent. The Taunt of Memory of Monastery will now increase combo breakers effect chance by 75%, increases Tiger Palm's damage by 30%. And the Talent Communion with the Wind will now increase the damage of your Strike of the Windlord or Whirling Dragon Punch by 20%, up from 10%. For Paladin changes, I'm also going to be really light, so reference the video linked in the description in order to get more info. But for the few specs that they got a couple of changes for, like Retribution for instance, they want to make sure that their Herald of the Sun playstyle rotational bloat is adjusted a little bit, plus make some changes to the damage output of Herald of the Sun, like Dawn Light, increasing its damage greatly, but that radiating AoE damage that it does is slightly lessened, so it has a lot more of this priority focus to it. Another spec that I also got a couple of changes is Holy Paladin, which is primarily just a bunch of buffs all across the board for a variety of the healing, mana reductions on a number of different abilities, plus some more usages out of their Shield of the Righteous to put them in melee if they are going for a more melee focused damage holy power spender build. Next, we have the class of Priest, and I'm going to be partial in terms of some of the previous changes they had, but also some of the new stuff. The previous changes that you'll want to reference the video in the description for is for Dusk Priest, which is primarily focused around buffing their shadowy heals and shadowy interactions, shadowy talents, but also reducing some of the focus on that holy healing and holy specific talents. Mostly it's a choice between like Shadow Healing with Void Weaver is imped up, but the Oracle version of Dusk Priest with that holy healing is getting slightly toned down a bit. Shadow Priests have also got some changes where they got a baseline damage nerf, but a variety. A good portion of their specific abilities have been buffed back up quite a decent bit. Also, Psychic Link will transfer 60% of single target damage onto nearby targets with Vampiric Touch, which is pretty awesome. Quite a lot of cleave, which hopefully will math out as a gain in the long term. But also this time we did see some new buffs for Holy, specifically, mostly just buffs across the board. All damage buffed up by 19%, which Holy damage output in dungeons has been very straightforward, so this is going to be a huge increase, just a raw increase without adding additional complexity into their output. Abilities like Flash Heal, Prayer of Healing, Holy Word Serenity, and Holy Word Sanctify, as well as Renew, which you get mostly through passive procs nowadays. All their healing have been buffed up by 12%, so a decent overall increase for Holy. That works and serves them pretty well both in raid content but also in Mythic Plus dungeons. Next, we have the class that is the Rogue, and for Rogues, you are going to have to reference the beta video for even more detailed breakdown, but essentially what they're doing is some baseline damage buffs for Assassination, which was, I think, pretty much needed. Assassination wasn't doing badly, but it did feel like it was kind of falling behind the other two specs slightly in some content. Outlaw, they ended up bug fixing the auto attack nerf, and they also buffed up a couple of their talents, but because of the bug fix to their auto attacks, they did end up reducing the auto attack damage by like 10%, so it is a slight nerf regardless. For Subtlety, they also did do a slight overall damage nerf by 8%, but the hero talents of Deathstalker, a variety of those talents have been greatly improved in order to better support some of their AoE output. For the class of Shaman, you are going to have to reference the beta video, but there really is just not a lot going on here to begin with. So the fastest breakdown that I could do for all three specs is Elemental got a slight damage nerf, but a lot of its hybrid healing increase. Enhancement got a fairly sizable healing increase. So not really a lot of output, but I guess for PvP content or dungeons or defensives, this is going to give them a little bit better self-sustainability. The only thing that really happened to Restoration Shaman is a change to the ability of Ascendance, where it no longer gives you the instant casty playstyle, which is something we've covered already. They also saw a bunch of buffs to healing spells that we also covered before, like Healing Rain, Chain Heal, Healing Wave, as well as Riptide. When it comes to Warlock, again, you're going to want to reference the video in the description of this one in order to get more detailed info, but they essentially wanted to do some hero talent tuning, specifically buffing things like Diabolus for Demonology, but doing a bit of tuning for Soul Harvester, because for both Demo and Affliction, that one was looking like it was getting real strong as of recently. Outside of this, for Affliction, they only ended up nerfing the ability of Dark Harvest slightly, by like 30%, but they didn't touch the rest of their kit for the most part. And Destruction got actually a fairly sizable damage increase pretty much all across the board for a variety of basic abilities and some of their talents, specifically focusing on things such as your Soulfire as well as the Avatar of Destruction talent. Finally, the class of Warrior. Also, you will need to use the video link in the description for more detailed nitty-gritty info, but some of the biggest draws out of this new set of changes, deep wounds for all three specs of Warrior have been nerfed quite a decent bit. Technically, all three warriors have access to some bleed talents and some bleed viability, and any talent that applies deep wounds have also been toned down quite a solid bit for all of them. For Arms Warrior, they specifically focused on giving him more AoE damage through the ability of Blaze Storm, but slightly less single target with nerfs to Mortal Strike, slight nerfs overall. Fury similarly got a very samey type of treatment, less auto attack damage, some adjustments between Bloodthirst and Rage and Blow to make sure one doesn't really overpower the other, but also buffs for some of their AoE base abilities. For Protection Warrior, unfortunately, we do see some damage nerfs, which is also not great. That is one of the tanks that I feel like had really good aggro, where other tanks got buffed up. Prot, unfortunately, does get nerfs here. They also did see a slight survivability buffs for a handful of talents, but nothing too crazy that's really going to redefine protection going forward. But with that being said, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys did enjoy this class update. If you did enjoy this patch notes read or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like, as would very much appreciate it. Be sure to join our Discord community if you want to keep up with any discussions regarding Midnight with the community. Link to that in the description of every single video, and let me know in the comments which of these changes, whether we're talking about buffs or nerfs, that potentially changes the class that you're possibly going to be maining once Midnight officially launches.